Here's a look at a recap of your markets on this Wednesday, the 8th day of October. A higher day on the grain futures. Cattle futures were higher today, pulled up mostly by a sharply higher market on the feeder cattle. Soybeans leading the push on the grain side. Hogs, on the other hand, slightly lower for the day. We'll take a look at those a bit more here in a few minutes, as well as some very impressive prices on some drafts of cattle at auction barns around the state today. Before we get into that, though, we'll take a look at our two tracking measures, kind of a story of two tells here. The Missouri Stocker formula, based roughly on a 550-pound steer through the auction barns in the state of Missouri, setting at $421.28. That's about $5 higher than where we were last Friday. Of course, those prices there being pulled down just by seasonally a lot of high health risk calves. Currently, that Stocker formula is setting about $20 below the record prices we seen a couple of months ago. On the other hand, the CME Cash Feeder Cattle Index, of course, it's based on a 800-pound steer up through the 12-state feeding region. So a lot of those are grass. Yearlings are still showing up around some very impressive drafts of loads of cattle around. And, of course, Missouri is contributing to that quite well right now. That Cash Feeder Cattle Index setting at 365.51, and that's only $1.50 from the all-time record high. Taking a look at some of those drafts that sold around the state today that stuck out at the auction barns. South Central Regional Stockyards in Vienna, they sold 120 head of 702-pound heifers at $367. Windsor Livestock Auction, they had a big consignment this week that was broke up into a few smaller drafts, some very impressive fancy calves that came to town. 79 head of steers weighing 509 pounds sold at $495. They had 27 head of steers, 422 pounds. They sold at $520. Now, just to do the math for you, that brought $21.94 per head. Right shortly after those steers sold, they had 28 head of heifers that averaged 412 pounds that sold at $545. That tallied up to $2,245 per head. And you did hear me right. Those heifers brought $50 a head more than their steer brothers. At Springfield Livestock Marketing Center today, they had some awful impressive loads of Holstein steers. Of course, that's always been considered the Holstein steer capital of the world, and they sure haven't lost that status yet. 74 head of steers, 687 pounds, sold at $319. And then 43 head of steers, 889-pound Holstein steers, brought $287.50. That figures up to $2,556 per head for Holstein steers. Box beef cutout values today. Choice up 19 cents at $366.16. Select was down $3.64 at $345.24. Those values based on 142 loads of cuts, trimmings, and grinds. The Choice Select spread at $20.92. Negotiated feedlot trade for the week. So far, 1,368 head. Nearly all of that's been outside the 5-state feeding region. Texas has reported 78 head, nothing in Kansas or Nebraska so far. Iowa's reported 225 head, that light volume at 228 to 230 live. Basically, the market's still yet to be established so far this week. Taking a look at those closing futures from the Mercantile Exchange, October live cattle, 233.85 up 75, December 238.87 up 115, and February 242.22 up 150. Feeder cattle, October closed up an even $4, 369.50, November up 457, 368.82, and January up 452 at 363.52. Lean hogs, October was down 22 cents at 97.62, December 86.10 down 7, and February 88.12 down 15. Turning our attention to the grain markets at the elevators around the state on Wednesday, corn was mixed from 1 lower to 2 higher. Beans 7 to 16 higher, and wheat bids unchanged. Corn bids in the St. Louis region, 433 to 439, Kansas City at 396. Soybean bids, St. Louis 1029 to 1042, Kansas City 964 to 984. Wheat bids in St. Louis 457 to 495, Kansas City at 462. On the Board of Trade, corn contracts December 2 1/4 higher, closing at 422 even. March was up a penny and a half at 437 3/4, and May up a penny at 446 1/4. November beans 7 1/2 higher, 1029 1/2. January up 5 1/4, 1044 1/4. March at 1057 1/4, up 4 1/4. Wheat contracts the first 3 months all up a half penny for the day. December closed at 507 1/4. March at 525 1/4, and May at 537 3/4. Soybean meal for October up $1.90 a ton at $270.80. Soybean oil for October 44 cents a hundredweight higher at $50.97. With the Missouri Department of Agriculture, that's a recap of the markets for Wednesday. This is Tony Hancock.